No, I don't want that. But now how do I know if it's the right meeting?
Well, Affordable Housing Trust.
And let me know.
Okay.
We're good to go. Okay, well, this is a initial meeting of the Wellfleet Affordable Housing Trust. The meeting is held virtually in accordance with the temporary suspension and enhancement of the open meeting law requirements by Governor Baker. Instructions for the Zoom meeting are in the meeting agenda. The meeting is a public meeting, will be recorded by the town. Anybody else recording the meeting may do so as long as they inform the chair and don't disrupt the meeting in doing so. I was asked to chair this just to conduct the organizational part of the meeting, and once we're organized, whoever is going to preside will get to be the presiding person. And I thought, I know most of you, but some by name only. I thought maybe a way to start would be just to do like 60-second introductions. And why don't we just, if that's okay, why don't we start with Elaine?
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Elaine Mcelroy. This was my idea to change from our old housing trust to the new one. I think it's a much stronger organization, and going forward, it will be really beneficial. From my experience serving on the Housing Authority for the past 12 plus years, we found that once the Community Preservation Act kicked in and there was some real money available, our trust wasn't quite up to the job to make the most efficient use of those funds and other funds. So I'm pleased that the town voted this. I'm really happy to have Harry organizing this meeting and the expertise we're going to need to make our way through this. So, and just a little plug for a nonprofit I'm involved with that just launched called the Fleet Fund. It's a new fund to help Wellfleet people in need, and we're really pleased to have that up and running.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Hi everyone, I'm Kathleen Nagel. I really know most of you, I think. I've lived here for 20 years. I work for Kinlan Grover Real Estate, breaking our housing market on a daily basis in order to afford to live here myself. The counterbalance to that, I think, is my need and desire to try to help with the affordable housing cause. I have volunteered with Habitat since I moved here 20 years ago. I'm in the midst of serving on their board of directors. This is my 6th and final year doing that. And Elaine asked for me to be here, so here I am.
Okay. Sharon? I'm going in order that you show up on my screen, so there's nothing magic here.
Sharon Rue Lager, and I've lived in Wellfleet for about 12 and a half years year round, and summer person before then. And been on the local housing partnership for, geez, you know what? I kind of don't remember how long, but maybe 3 or 4 years. And am quite active in staying in touch on both that and the Wellfleet Housing Authority, and trying to stay informed. An advocate.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
12 seems to be a good number. That's about how long we have been here full time as well. And I currently serve as chair of the Housing Partnership. I also serve on the Housing Authority, and I also am the chair of the CPC. And obviously there are a lot of interconnections between those 3 groups.
Michael?
Say my name, Harry?
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry. My phone rang right when you said that. I'm Michael Devasta. I'm the chair of the Wellfleet Select Board. And part of the reason I ran for the board was really because of the housing issues that, we face in this town. And I'm really happy to be part of this and glad to have been appointed by the board to be on this board. So, yeah. I grew up in Wellfleet. I lived here my whole life and bounced around from tool shed to winter house and back to shed, and finally was able to buy something here. But I know what the struggle is. Even if you can't afford to live here, it's real difficult to even find a place to live. So yeah, happy to be here.
Okay, thank you. And Jim?
Yeah, Jim Hood. I am the chair of the Board of Water Commissioners and kind of got involved with the housing issue with Elaine asking me to join the Lawrence Road Housing Task Force a couple of years ago now, when we were looking at the issue of water for the project there on Lawrence Road. And pleased to report that we have identified, we were able to secure a significant grant from Mass Works for the installation of a new water main that will greatly benefit the housing project on Lawrence Road. And so this is kind of a segue from that into joining this group and on the Affordable Housing Trust. And I'm pleased to be part of it.
Thank you. And I'm Harry Turkanian. My association with Wellfleet goes back to being a special police officer in 1970 and a full-time resident here starting in 1976. Professionally, I practiced law for a long time, and the primary focus was on real estate, acquisition, financing, permitting, development, management and disposition, represented buyers, sellers, lenders, landlords, tenants. I also have limited experience as a town planner in Truro and town administrator in Wellfleet. Where I'm perhaps most deficient is in hands-on knowledge of affordable housing opportunities and tools that are available. So that's the place where I have to go to school. I was certified as a Massachusetts certified public purchasing official in 2015 or 16. That certification is now lapsed because you have to go to school to renew it every few years. So that's me. I think the first item on the agenda is, unless I don't see any members of the public here, so I'm assuming no public comment. I'm going to try and take notes at the same time, so if there are pauses, that's what's happening. No public comment. So I guess the first thing we need to decide is what we think we need for trust officers. We certainly will need a treasurer. We certainly will need someone to be either the chair of the Board of Trustees, I guess would be the most appropriate title. And I guess open it for discussion whether we need a vice chair and or a clerk. I don't know whether people have any thoughts on that. But I think we definitely need a chairperson of the Board of Trustees and a treasurer.
Harry,
Yes.
do you think we would need a clerk, right, to keep, or is there any chance of getting town help with that capacity?
Well, we are an instrumentality of the town, so I'm assuming that the town clerk is going to be the public records officer and the place where our minutes and records get filed.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming that that function, at least from a formal standpoint, would be taken care of by the town clerk. In terms of taking minutes and stuff like that, I don't know how to handle that. I find it difficult to run meetings and take good minutes at the same time myself, although I've done it for a bunch of committees.
Okay, I just didn't know if we would have any recourse to any of the committee secretaries for that purpose.
I think that that would be a very good thing because, this is not, this is a serious endeavor. We will be dealing with projects that have scope, that are complex, that involve significant amounts of money. So it shouldn't be kind of amateur hour, I don't think.
Mhm.
I think we should be formal in what we do and how we do it, just so we have a good record and we know what we did and why, and other people know what we did and why as well.
So we could potentially put in a request for assistance.
I would think so.
Okay. Well, I think we definitely need a chair, and I think the vice chair would be a great idea. And the treasurer's job, I know for the past year or more, it's really been hard to kind of get good reporting on the monies that are in the trust fund.
Mhm.
And I'm hoping that situation in the town will clear up, but it's been a challenge.
Yeah, I would assume that the nuts and bolts of the accounting would be handled by the town accounting department, and so that the treasurer isn't actually going to be balancing books,
Asking for reports and
asking for reports, making sure we have an audit done annually, those kind of things, because that is a requirement of the statute. Chair, treasurer, vice chair, any other person we need immediately to elect, or shall we just proceed to do those? Okay, can I suggest that we do the chair first? So let's look for nominations for the chairperson of the Board of Trustees.
Would you be interested?
Elaine, I'm sorry.
Michael, were you going to say something?
Go ahead, Elaine.
Oh, I was going to ask if Harry would be interested and willing to chair this group.
Willing, are there any other volunteers or nominees? So
Nope.
I'll speak.
When you got the right one, you don't need another.
Okay,
Would you accept that?
I will accept that. If we're going to vote, since it's a virtual meeting, we have to vote by roll call. So on the question of appointing myself as chairperson of the Board of Trustees, Elaine, how do you vote?
Aye.
Kathleen,
Aye.
Sharon,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
and Harry votes aye.
Thank you so much. That's
Okay.
wonderful.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Huh?
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. Vice Chair.
I nominate Elaine.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay, who nominated? Gary?
Jerry.
And Jim seconded it.
Yes.
Any other nominees? Okay, so on the question of electing Elaine McElroy as vice chair of the Board of Trustees, how do you vote? Elaine?
Aye.
Kathleen?
Aye.
Sharon?
I'll have to come back to Sharon.
Okay,
Chairperson.
Gary?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Sharon, are you with
Aye.
us? Huh?
I heard her. She said,
Okay,
Aye.
and Harry votes aye also, so that's also 7-0. Treasurer. Probably not gonna have any immediate duties, so we don't necessarily have to do that this minute, but as long as we're all here. Any volunteers or nominees?
I nominate Gary Sorkin.
Okay. I would second that. You have
Second.
Any position on that, Gary?
No, as long as there's no inherent conflict, since I hold the same position at the Housing Authority. Harry, if you don't think that
Don't think that there is.
okay, then I'm happy to accept.
Okay, any other nominees? Okay, seeing none, let's vote on the question of electing Gary Sorkin as treasurer. Elaine,
aye.
Kathleen,
Aye.
Sharon? Did I miss you, Sharon?
Oh, aye.
Yep, Gary,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
and Harry votes aye. Okay.
Thank you all.
That was the most important, well, the most mechanical part of this, but I think we need to have a discussion about the more nitty gritty of organizing this trust and what the trust's focus should be, not that we can't change it as time goes on, and how we should go about dealing with the question of bylaws and so forth. Anyone?
Harry, can I ask a question based upon the material you sent out?
Sure.
Some places have a declaration.
Yep.
And some places have a bylaw and some places have both.
Yes.
Can you, what is the use of either of those documents?
Well, the bylaw, it seems to me to have a couple of purposes. For one thing, the enabling statute says that a town may omit or modify the default powers in the statute by bylaw, and they may grant additional powers consistent with section 55C. So for example, one power that you sometimes see in bylaws is the ability to execute grant agreements with the local CPC. That I don't believe is mentioned in the statute. Another thing you'd put in bylaw is the makeup of the Board of Trustees, how many there will be, what their terms will be, whether any of them have to be selected from some cohort like the Planning Board or the Housing Partnership. The Declaration of Trust is a little bit different, and technically a Declaration of Trust is the trustees saying in a formal way the conditions under which they accept property and manage it and dispose of it. And it also has some mechanical provisions, because typically when you do a real property transaction, you have to record that trust document or record an abstract of it as a way of showing the world that when the trustees signed the deed, it was something they had the power to do. So it kind of serves as a public, at least in the real estate side, document that provides an enumeration of the trustees' powers, a mechanism for determining who the trustees are, a statement that people can rely on that public record as being conclusive. And I don't know if Kathleen, you've been at closings where there's a deed with a trustee's certificate attached. If it's a deed from a property that's held in trust, that's typically connects those dots to show that that transaction is from a trust and that the authority of the trust to do that's clearly delineated. So I think you need both because they serve two slightly different purposes. And I gave you links to a couple of trusts, the Lincoln one and the Grafton one. They're both very similar in terms of content. And I looked at a couple of the bylaws, and they're also fairly similar in terms of content also. So I do think we need both. How we go about doing that is a good question. I mean, one thing we can do is just ask to have town council prepare drafts of both documents.
Would we be able to give them some direction, some of the things we wanted to be sure were included?
I don't see why not.
Mhm.
Typically, anytime you ask a lawyer to do something for you, you tell that person what you want them to do.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had specifically, in thinking about this, wanted to see a specific power to execute grant agreements with the Wellfleet CPC.
Yeah.
Um,
I noticed one document, I've only seen it in one, where there was a statement that the trust would work in collaboration with the Housing Authority and the local housing partnership. I think it might be important to at least put a relationship in there. I don't know.
I don't know, because I tend to think of these documents as being much more of a legal framework than a kind of a relationship. Because clearly, kind of one thing unsaid here is that, you know, we've got a local housing partnership, we've got a housing authority, we have a currently existing housing trust, which I'm assuming is going to be wound down and folded into this one. But there are at least 3 organizations, and we have to have some sort of understanding of who does what and what our respective expectations are. And then you've got a relationship with the Community Preservation Committee as well.
Mhm.
And perhaps the planning board too.
Yeah, it feels like all the powers that are listed are ones we would want the trust to have. But then there's the discussion of they have the power, but like some of the work that brings the project to them to enact their power is done by some of the other groups. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, in one of the things I was reading, it basically said there's 3 forms of trusts. One as a funding entity, one as an active initiator of programs. That's number 2, or number 3, a hybrid of both. And we have groups that have been pretty active initiators of programs, but I wouldn't want the trust not to have that as maybe, you know, not as a funding entity. I think that's where, you know, the main focus maybe.
Other comments?
Elaine, are you saying that you would rather we not be hybrid or that we would?
I mean, I think hybrid is probably ideal, but recognizing that a lot of the more hybrid activities might be coming from the other groups. I mean, I do think that establishing priorities for the work of all these groups is something that the trust could do, and that could be a conversation between all 3 groups.
Well, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's probably a good idea to not define our parameters too narrowly at the outset, and leave room for us to act in whatever, in what capacity we may want to act in the future, even if at first we only operate as a funding mechanism, that in our sort of bylaws that govern this board, that the parameters are left open enough that we can assume different roles that are allowed of that of the trust. So When we had spoken before, we talked about, you know, the housing authority and what it does, and what the current trust does, and not knowing exactly what role they will have in the future as a result of this. And I guess I would just say, you know, it's probably a good idea to just keep the parameters of what we define as our role fairly open.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree with that, because I think it's, you want the flexibility for the trust to evolve and develop into what it's ultimately going to be. I think initially the project expertise already exists within the local housing partnership and the housing authority. And probably the place where there's the most need is in providing a more formal financial structure. And that maybe that's what we should do first, but I wouldn't want to foreclose the ability for the trust to take on projects as well. So I would be in favor of the broad suite of powers that's in the statute. And in fact, the only one that really comes to mind that wasn't called out in the statute is the ability to sign grant agreements with the CPC.
Mhm.
Other bylaw comments, I think the 7 is probably a common sense number of trustees. It's large enough so you can have diverse representation and enough of a discussion that's a real discussion, but it's not so large that the board becomes unworkable. I think boards of 10, 15, 20 people just turn out to be train wrecks myself. So I
Harry,
would, yep, go ahead.
one thing that I was reading in the trust, it says that, I think it was the Grafton one, it
Yep.
said that everybody on the trust had to be a resident. And I don't believe there's anything in the actual statute that says that. And given the nature of Wellfleet, does it make sense for us to have a residency requirement, or are non-residents potentially a viable candidate to sit on the trust?
Well, I had actually made a note of that because the statute specifically says the town administrator is eligible for appointment as a trustee. And I don't know that Maria is a Wellfleet resident.
It's not, right.
And we may find that other useful expertise is not necessarily to be found in Wellfleet. For example, a banker with experience in financing real estate transactions. So I'm not sure that a residency requirement is a good idea,
Right, I agree.
particularly if it's applied to everybody. I certainly would exempt the town administrator, but we could just be silent on that. At least one of the trusts, one of the bylaws I looked at, or trust I looked at, said that, you know, as soon as you become a non-resident, you're
Yeah,
off.
you have to go on,
I
right.
forget whether that was Lincoln or
It was Grafton.
and I think we can rely on the select board as appointing authority to want the trust to be, you know, Wellfleet residents unless there's a reason for doing otherwise. You know, place some trust somewhere, right?
Right. So you're suggesting we're silent on that, not specifying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think,
One thought that I think in general, and I don't know that it has to do particularly with this group, but I think the more that we can bridge the resident and non-resident community, the non-residents often don't realize that they are adding to breaking the community here and making things less affordable. When they're here, oftentimes it's such a vibrant environment. It's
Mhm.
to even wrap their head around the fact that people can't afford to live here or buy a home here that grew up here or that are younger people. And so I certainly think anytime we can have that conversation, and if we had people that were second homeowners that were interested in this sort of environment, I certainly wouldn't think that we would want to shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yep.
I think I'm open to those to those points. I do think that maybe we should have a requirement that the majority of the board be residents. Because I just think it's important that that happens, that there's that kind of stakeholder foundation of the board, where as if it were, and right now I think that's fairly easy to do, but if you look like 20 years into the future or whatever, however long this trust is going to be available, the demographic shift is pretty stark. Like people my age that are involved, it may wind up being a situation where this trust would wind up being like 5-2 non-resident. And I think that could shift sort of the way people sort of address the issues, right? So I would be in favor of having a requirement that the majority of the board be Wellfleet residents. That would leave 3 spaces that could be potential non-residents.
Did I misread something in the materials that were sent out, that as far as the duties of the trust, that would be from time to time taking actions that would not require further review, say by the select board or or the town administrator, that they could be directly done by this group, such as transfer of real estate, things like that. And does that in any way complicate this issue with, if we don't allow non-residents to participate in decisions with respect to, say, town meeting, for example? How would that be impacted in this situation?
Well, I think it's clear that one of the motivating reasons for affordable housing trusts is so that there is flexibility to act and respond outside of the whole annual town meeting cycle. Lots of opportunities come and go before you can act on them in that.
Yes.
So yeah, the trust does have power to acquire, hold, and dispose of real property without town meeting involvement. So there is, I think, a case to be made that the trustees should be predominantly Wellfleet residents to be stewards of those assets.
I think that the idea of having 1 or 2 that bring in outside expertise, who may also be, part-time homeowners, like Jeff Sachs comes to mind, who's a affordable housing developer who we've worked with on, talking about 95 Lawrence Road. Someone like that might be quite useful.
Mm-hmm. One other membership-related question that arises is, people have any thoughts on whether some of the trustees should be specifically be drawn from other town boards or committees, and housing authority, local housing partnership, planning board, I don't know, finance committee, I don't know.
I saw 1 or 2 of these bylaws that you gave out for reading, where they suggested that people living in affordable housing, or using the services in one way or another, possibly would be included.
I think what we've heard at some of the meetings about trusts is that because all of our towns have so many committees, it can be hard to attract people. And ideally you want to attract the people that care the most. So maybe not being too specific. We talked about, Gary and I talked about like a finance committee member, and we weren't sure that, are they allowed to serve on?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of follow that up by saying there are some charter requirements that limit your ability to serve on certain boards and committees. Finance committee members can only serve on other boards with the consent of the moderator, and I think that was intended to be short-term or one-off kind of things, or the exception rather than the rule. So, and I think that there are some, I don't know if there are any other boards where membership on that board precludes membership on another board. There are some boards where you can't hold, I think, membership on both the planning board and the appeals board, for example, but there's some other charter provisions that touch on that. I think flexibility should be, at least initially, the word. If we find, or if the town finds that, we've got to be more structured and formal about that, we can, the bylaw can always be amended. And I
Yeah.
think the bylaw is where those residency, those qualifications would be put.
All right, are the bylaws of the trust subject to town meeting vote?
Yeah, the bylaw itself is a town bylaw. So that is subject to town meeting vote. It's subject to review by the Attorney General's office. And that's it's the same process for any other general bylaw. The trust declaration I don't think there's any requirement that it be reviewed by anybody except the trustees that are going to sign it.
So could we make the trust bylaw broad enough to encompass different scenarios, but then either within the declaration or in some other way that we could define better, that we say, since it's silent on residency versus non-residency, maybe we don't have to say anything, but maybe in the declaration we say we are open to non-residents or membership by committee assignment.
I wouldn't put that in a declaration of trust, because you're really trying to, it's a town charter-like document. It's the kind of organic organizing document for the trust.
Where
So
could we
really
put it,
should
Harry?
only have things that are necessary. Any membership qualifications, whether you have to be a member of this or you can't be that, I think if there are going to be any, should be in the bylaw. And to some degree, it's an opportunity for the town to say, yes, this is what we want our trust to be, by saying, yes, we want these people to be eligible to be trustees. But again, I'd at least initially be as non-specific as possible until we figure out what's going on
I agree.
and what makes sense and what works and what doesn't work.
Right. Yep.
Staying the same.
Mhm.
Okay.
There's one little tiny thing that almost every bylaw I've saw, when it says the purpose,
Mhm.
and they always say the creation and preservation of affordable housing,
Mhm.
and the word support has to be added there. And that's when the CPA amended it to include support, that's a really, really important component.
Mhm.
I have a question about this, and I'm just wondering if the trust is actually is it does it, all the housing that's like provided or worked on through this trust have to be like capital A with quotes around it, affordable housing, or is this can this be open or adapted to include what some people would call attainable housing, which is, not necessarily the
Good
capital
word.
A affordable, but, to aid people in, obviously it's an expensive place. It's not typical of Massachusetts where you have like affordable housing, meaning something somewhere and something else on Cape Cod. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, are we pigeonholed in, what sort of income guidelines and what kind of framework we can utilize to basically work on projects?
Good question.
I know that the Grafton bylaw, for example, says for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in the town of Grafton for the benefit of low and moderate income households. So, I think that it's not just low income housing, but, the whole workforce housing issue. The statute, which I got somewhere. I can either put it up on the screen or I can just look at my own.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because trusts are really dependent on community preservation funds, and those funds can be used up to 100% of the area median income. I think legally moderate may be described as 80% and under, but it's a really good question. And it's also a broader issue that I think the Cape as a whole needs to work on.
Yeah, the statute says, it's very similar. The purpose of the trust is to provide for the creation and preservation of affordable housing in municipalities for the benefit of low and moderate income households and for the funding of community housing as defined in Chapter 44B. So that's the statutory purpose. We could ask that, let me go back to the meeting. We could ask to make it broader than that if we like. Do we want to talk about workforce housing or?
I think it's just part of our primary need in this community is that, like, those people who are in the middle that sort of can't quite make that leap from qualifying for affordable housing and being able to afford a house, and then also our lack of rental property that's outside of that parameter, right? So as soon as you don't qualify for affordable housing, you wind up in this situation where not only can you not buy a house, but there's actually nowhere for you to live.
Yep.
And, I see, all the time people living in, basically in-law apartments with a hot plate. And, there's definitely a huge problem here and on the whole Outer Cape with those kinds of circumstances where people are actually earning a living, fishing or doing construction. They're not in a situation where they want or are want to be constrained by their income, or are even, they're already outside of that income, which would qualify for them to be in affordable housing, or they're running some kind of, ad hoc business where it wouldn't be suitable to get into an affordable housing unit. That's a big part of the problem with housing here that's just really unaddressed. So I think to the degree that we can address that issue, I think we should leave ourselves the latitude to do that if we can. I just don't know the answer to what we are statutorily
And that's
confined to.
a question I'm not sure I know the answer to.
If we get funds from
No.
I mean, in addition to CP, we would necessarily be limited by that statute, right?
We lost part of what you said.
Does that make sense?
But if I can guess, you're asking
Oh,
about,
I'm sorry.
go ahead again. I think she's,
Um,
let's wait a minute, see if she comes back.
My internet. I'm sorry.
I'm guessing, Sharon, that your question is if we get CPC funds, are they still subject to CPC constraints and restrictions? And I think the answer to that is clearly yes.
Mhm.
But
No,
Harry, can
what
we,
I was asking was, if we get funds from other sources, can we use those as we please?
Uh, As long as we're using it for a purpose for which the trust was established, yes.
Yes.
So no picnics, but, you know,
but Harry, I think the crux of it is if the legislation is prescriptive in terms of 60 or an 80% or low and moderate, which is generally defined as 60% or 80%.
mhm.
I don't know if that's a true legal definition or not, or can the word moderate be greater than that? But if the legislation says X, can we make a bylaw that says X plus?
I think that's a question for council. I don't know the answer to it.
I can refer that to the town administrator to bring up to town council. If we want to clearly define what that question is, but I think I get I grasp it, and I can ask Maria to request that from town council.
Michael, I think the first question is whether moderate is defined.
Moderate is defined.
Does
Okay.
it have an upper limit or not? If it doesn't, then we're in the clear.
Mhm.
If it does, then what are do we have any ability to work above moderate?
Well, we were, Sharon and Gary and I were in a meeting with the CDP on Wednesday, and the town of Chatham is interested in expanding what's accepted as affordable housing. Provincetown did this, Nantucket did this. The two ways that we were told you do it is either by a bylaw. Provincetown, I think Nantucket did it by a bylaw. Provincetown did it by establishing yet another trust with the purpose of supporting housing at a higher income level. So I think there are two ways to address it, but I'm not sure whether we could do that within this actual trust.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that the CDP was doing a study for Chatham about this, which they were going to share with us. But it's a really good question, Michael. Yeah. I mean, we are pursuing the accessory dwelling bylaw, and we've gotten the planning board is starting to move over into our corner. And, you know, that's a mechanism that wouldn't be under our purview, but would be good.
Okay, what I was gonna suggest is I'm going to prepare minutes, but hopefully I can accurately summarize the things that we have talked about, so we would have a document that we can that we can base our request for council services on. Say, we need a bylaw, we like this bylaw, but we'd like to do A, B, and C in addition. We like the trust, you know, this trust, but we'd like to do, you know, we'd like to make some modifications to it. And I could try and put that document together. If we're going to discuss it and approve it, it would have to be at another meeting. Because one of the things I wanted to just touch on, I don't know if this discussion has run its course or not, was just to remind everybody that in addition to the trust document, there are some other things that we are subject to, most prominently the open meeting law, the public records law. What we do is largely is going to be a public record with a few limited exceptions. Conflict of interest law. And I think on that, on the conflict of interest law in particular, there is a requirement that every 2 years you go through the Ethics Commission's training process, and you get you print out a certificate that shows you've completed it, and that gets filed with the town clerk. And I don't know whether Jennifer brought this up to you folks when you were sworn in, but just,
She did.
okay,
She
excellent.
did.
So I don't need to be harp on that then. And then there's some other stuff, procurement laws and stuff that would arise on a, transaction related basis. But I wanted to just make sure that we're all conscious of open meeting, public records, and conflict of interest law. Now, you may find you still want to file a disclosure. Typically, serving on 2 non-compensated boards is not a conflict. But I have filed disclosures in the past out of an abundance of caution.
Well, Harry, that would be wonderful if you're willing to
Yep.
do that work that we can then review and
Mhm.
have it sent on.
Do we want to consider meeting jointly with the housing authority or the local housing partnership?
I think that would be a good idea, once soon, but that's a lot of people to get together, but I think it would be great and, to have a framework for the discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah. There's an old document that was prepared back when the local housing partnership was created that if you want, I can find it and share it with you, where they actually listed what the housing authority is supposed to do and what the local housing partnership is supposed to do. I don't know if that would be a helpful thing to have, to see, to
I'd love
make
to
the
see
third
it.
column for the
I'd
trust.
like to see that.
Yeah,
I'm interested in seeing it.
Okay.
One other thought about bylaws is I had this discussion with Elaine before we were appointed, is to just talk a little bit about the timing. If we want to have a bylaw for the annual town meeting, which is the 4th Monday in April, assuming that it actually takes place on that day, typically the warrant goes to the printer around the 20th of March, so about 5 weeks before that. And typically the select board needs some time to react to the proposed bylaws. And the bylaw review committee needs some time, and other affected boards and commissions need an opportunity. So I was suggesting to Elaine that if we are going to have a bylaw, it probably should be in near final form late January, mid-February, if it's going to get a full and complete treatment before an April town meeting. So that's kind of a compressed schedule considering it's December 18th now.
So I'm not going to obviously speak for the board, but I think I certainly am thinking about as a select board member, and this will come up on an agenda, I think, pretty certainly after New Year's, is that in my opinion, it's probably a good idea to move town meeting back a little bit, because we'll probably wind up having it outside, is my estimation. And the weather in, say, June is preferable to the odds of it happening in, an earlier month. But I don't know what's going to happen, but I just, I think that it's highly possible that town meeting could be postponed again.
If you have more time, you can always take advantage of it, but if you have less time, it's very hard to take
Sure.
advantage of that. And the select board does have the authority to reschedule a town meeting. So,
Would our request go through the town administrator or through the select board to go to town council then?
I think the select board controls the purse strings for that. Am I right, Mike?
You know, I'm not actually sure. I mean, generally, when things come up like this, they come up at a select board meeting, and the town administrator is the one who usually contacts town council. I don't think we actually have the right to contact town council without going through the town administrator.
Yeah, I tended to to just go to town council on the clearly non-controversial stuff. And if it was a policy issue, I'd go to the select board and say, I have this request to involve town council. What do you want me to do?
Right.
This, I think, falls in the former category where we're just trying to draft a decent set of documents. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just submit this to the town administrator and see what she wants to do with it. I
Okay.
think, you know, whenever I've been involved with stuff, it's never been a formality or a vote whether to send something to town council. Usually it's just a conversation during a meeting.
Mhm.
And with something like this, I think, you know, if we as a group send this over and ask it to be reviewed by town council, she'll, I would imagine, put that forward to town council, but she may bring it to the select board and ask first. I'm not sure.
Yep.
Would it help to put some framework around it? I was just looking at the Grafton one, and, you know, if we did some search and replace with Grafton and Wellfleet,
That's what I was thinking.
and we changed the things regarding either residency or number of members. Hey,
Violet.
Oh, hi there.
would that be helpful to town council?
I
Yeah.
think it
There's-
probably would be. I was thinking in terms of saying the excuse me, Grafton bylaw and Grafton Declaration of Trust are good starting points, but we would like to see these issues treated a little differently.
Yeah, exactly.
And give them a list of things that we might want to think about doing differently.
Harry, are you willing to do that by yourself, or would you like a little subcommittee or?
I'm willing to put together a draft, but I think we need to discuss it at a meeting.
Okay,
Because, you know, we don't want that serial deliberation, open meeting law issue
Mhm.
out there. So,
we would be discussing whatever you put together.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I can put together a document. It can be a document that we'll review and edit at a meeting.
Sounds good.
Question about future meeting schedule. I think initially we've got some work to do and might have to meet a little more frequently than we would as an operating entity, particularly if we're just going to be a financial entity. Next week is obviously not a good week for people, but are people around in late December, early January, or some of
This
you-
year for sure.
Huh?
This year for sure.
I'm not going anywhere.
Where would we go?
Exactly. Are there particular days of the week that are off limits or are preferable to some of you?
I don't have days that are off limits except for probably, you know, when the select board meets, and random other days that I don't know, but there's no specific days, but I'm generally constrained by the tide.
Mm-hmm.
So, Yeah.
Okay, and I have 2 school building committee meetings that occur on Wednesdays. So if there is a day when I'm going to be conflicted, it will be Wednesday at 4 o'clock because they both meet right about then. Other than that, I'm free as a bird.
If we schedule in advance, I can usually book the time. If we're doing
Mhm.
things more last minute, it becomes a lot more of a challenge for me,
Mhm.
that flexibility.
Anybody else have constraints that we need to plan around?
Only the housing meetings tend to be on Thursday, both the Housing Authority and the Local Housing Partnership. So those would just, but they're not every week.
Mhm.
And the Water Commission meets usually the first and third Tuesday of the month at 4 p.m.
Harry, should we arbitrarily pick Monday and a time and we can sort of target that?
That makes sense, although I will check the tide charts to make sure that we don't have.
Well, after sunset, I'm generally done. So
Okay.
I don't like to be out there after sunset. So
Mhm.
in the winter anyway.
I don't blame you.
So a 4 o'clock might be okay for you, Michael?
Yeah, it should be 4,
January.
4:30, something like that generally works.
So 4 o'clock on the 28th, the next meeting, Harry?
Yeah, that's good, because I really kind of want to get this part of it done so that, so that we have a structure that that we operate under.
Sounds good.
Anything else? Anything else you want on an agenda for another meeting?
Harry, do you think we have to file an annual report this year?
I could do one. Trust held an organizing meeting and we're now organized. Thank you. No. I can do one if you like.
Well, I don't know if,
It seems kind of silly.
okay.
Okay. Any other agenda items for our next meeting?
I would like to talk about what the procedure for dissolving the old, figuring out the right timing for dissolving the old trust.
Mhm.
If that can be done sooner than later, and if that has to be done by a special, just to know. I think that's something we want to know. And
Okay.
Would that happen before the bylaws get passed?
It can. There's nothing in the statute that requires a bylaw. It just says
Oh, okay.
that a town can omit or modify powers, grant additional powers, and so forth. And it seems like that's traditionally where you set the number of trustees, but trustees have been appointed. We have a statute that gives us authority to do stuff.
Okay.
Technically, as long as we're not buying and selling real estate, we've done all the documentation we need already.
Okay.
Just
I just didn't
FYI,
want there to be no trust.
No.
just FYI for everybody's information, the Housing Authority and the Housing Partnership submitted a CPC application to initially fund the trust for $500,000. That was approved by the CPC, has been accepted by the Board of Selectmen, and will be on the town meeting warrant for approval. And if it's approved, means that on or about July 1st, we'll have $500,000 in which to work with.
That, I think, suggests that we probably should give the voters some confidence that we are actually organized and formal.
Yeah,
Before somebody says, here's $500,000, tell us how it all worked out.
right. Right, and the application is for affordable housing, but the specifics as to expenditure have not been spelled out. So that's something that the trust would have to decide.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes,
have a question.
shoot.
So when we were just talking about, Harry, you said we don't need to submit a bylaw. That's to the town, but we still have to draft bylaws for ourselves, no? Or is that different? Or is that the same thing?
I think the town bylaw is more defining membership and adding or limiting powers. Uh, I don't know whether we need any internal governing document, and actually a lot of it can be put in the Declaration of Trust. Are you thinking of things like, for example, we shouldn't vote to buy real estate without, say, 5 of 7 affirmative votes, for example? Just something
I-
like that, or?
Yeah, I guess that's what I was wondering. Like, are there certain, and I guess, it doesn't have to happen right away, but I didn't know if we are required to have bylaws as an organization,
No,
the trust. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure.
and there's actually nothing in the statute about a declaration of trust either.
Oh, okay. And then the other question I had was, do we have an account set up yet? Does anybody know
Not
in the
that I'm
town?
aware of.
Okay.
Not as far as I know.
I mean, we do have the current Affordable Housing Trust, which probably has, a couple of hundred, maybe hard to know, over $100,000 in it.
Mhm.
So
Um,
I'm wondering, would it make sense to, at this point, now that we've organized, to open the account and dissolve the previous account into it, to fold the other account into this account, into this trust account at this point? If anybody, does anybody know?
Well, I think maybe with the laundry list of what goes to council, one of the questions should be, what's the mechanism for winding down the existing trust and transferring its assets to this trust?
Right. Because it was a special legislation, so that may affect how it has to be dealt with.
The previous trust was?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just throwing it out there.
I don't have any problem with it. I just want to throw up one cautionary flag, which is the money that's in the trust now, the housing authority uses at its discretion to fund programs that support affordable housing. And so are we saying if we collapse that one into this one going forward, that all of those activities and decisions will be made through the trust?
We would have to agree to fund those activities, yes.
Yeah, so that I'm just, before we collapse it, we need a smooth mechanism by which we can continue to support those programs that are being supported through the trust funds.
See, everything is slightly more complicated than you think it is. Uh, I can read this stuff after we're done. Anything else?
So Mary, are you gonna get us your proposed information you're working on prior, or are we just gonna see it at the meeting and discuss it?
No, you'll get it within 48 hours because I can't read my handwriting much beyond that. But one thing you can do for me is I do not have email addresses for all of you. And the email address I want to use for this for myself is harry.turkanian@wellfleetma.gov. So I want to use my Wellfleet address so that the stuff's there for public records purposes and so forth. But if you would send me contact information so that I can, mail out documents, mail out agendas and the like, mail out draft minutes, that would be great.
That's harry.turkanian@wellfleet.gov.
Wellfleet-ma.gov.
That's what
That's
So we just send you a confirmation for our email addresses,
Yeah, I already have yours from the TA screening committee, Jim,
right?
and I have Elaine's,
You have mine, Harry?
and I may have yours. I don't know.
I've been using the personal one for you, Michael. Is that what you prefer?
That's the only one I use. I don't use the town one. It's all public record anyway, when you're a select board member.
Trouble is, I don't want to be separating it from the rest of the junk that's in my
Yeah.
email.
I know.
That's why I do that. Okay. I guess we're at the point where we need a vote to adjourn, and so I need a motion, and we have to take a roll call vote.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
Second,
Okay, Mike, Jim. Okay, Elaine on adjournment.
Aye.
Kathleen,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Michael,
Aye.
Jim,
aye.
Sharon.
Aye.
Harry votes aye. So that makes it unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you all, and
Thank
happy
you.
holidays to everyone.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Likewise.
Yeah.
Happy solstice.
Take care. I'm going to
See
leave.
you
the meeting.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.